Hi, good evening, and welcome to Stories with Pastor Torri. My name is Pastor Torri, and we are here this evening. And I know last week I had Pastor Judy here, and this week I invited Pastor Judy back because I think what we are talking about, I am learning with the topic and the issue of racism, that there are a lot of little issues inside of that bigger, the bigger issue of racism. And tonight we wanted to discuss one of the smaller issues that a lot of people are talking about over this past week, and that is the phrase defunding of police. And I'm going to bring Judy in here. And before we get started, I'm going to bring Judy in. Here she is, right here. Then there's this view too. There's this view, but I kind of like this view better. You like that better? Okay. And there was a couple of people asking why we are doing this and why this topic and why do we have two white female pastors up in Hackensack, Minnesota, talking about race and racism. And I believe that one of the major issues today within the United States is that many white people don't talk about racism. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to start. And they do not talk about it without bringing in a political aspect of it. And so we really want to talk about these issues, number one, as white people, as females, as pastors, and bring in a humanitarian aspect of it rather than a what was that word, Judy?
Partisan.
Partisan, thank you. I forget that word, partisan political aspect of it. And a lot of people, instead of looking at themselves and asking them questions and having conversations with people on a very human level, they often will point fingers at a political party or point fingers at somebody who they think is guilty. And my hope in having these discussions with another white person, another pastor, another female, is that maybe we can encourage people to begin talking in a way and bringing up conversations in a way where they're not pointing fingers at people, but putting their fingers down and opening up their ears and closing their mouth and listening to what other people are saying. And I do believe that there is an aspect of listening that comes from listening to other points of view, and also listening to those who are our Black brothers and sisters, listening, closing our mouths and listening. So with that said, Pastor Judy, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you?
I am doing so well. It's so fun to do this again.
Yes. Yeah. And we had lunch together today.
Yeah, great lunch.
And it was at Udam's
Thai restaurant, Hackensack, Minnesota, the best Thai food ever. Free advertisement there for Udam.
That's right. Udam's in Hackensack, Minnesota. If you are in the area, you need to stop, call your order in, and then you can pick it up. There are no walk-ins at this moment in time. Chicken fried rice, very good.
Egg rolls, excellent.
But this phrase, defunding the police, it's a scary term. And I guess my first question to you tonight is, what does that mean? What do you believe that means? What are we seeing? And what are the fears behind that?
You know, I guess the first thing I want to say about that term, defund the police, I believe it's a very unhelpful term, because what I think it immediately sparks in people is get rid of the police. Get rid of them. And that is not what that means. It's I would liken it more to reimagining what law enforcement looks like or could look like in this country. And And I took a picture of this thing on my phone. The question, in answer to the question, what does defunding the police look like to you? And then the person of color answered this, not me. So I just want to, this is her words, not mine. And then we can talk. It is, it says that defunding the police, the good news is that it actually doesn't take a ton of imagination. Defunding the police looks like a suburb. Affluent white communities already have and live in a world where they choose to fund youth, health, housing, and more, at least as much as they fund the police. These communities have lower crime rates, not because they have more police, but because they have more resources to support healthy society in a way that reduces all crime. When a teenager or preteen does something harmful in the suburbs, and I say teen because this is often where the lifelong incarceration cycle begins for Black and Brown youth, white communities bend over backwards to find alternatives to incarceration for their loved ones, to, quote, protect their future, like community service or rehab or restorative justice. Why don't we treat Black and Brown children the same way? Why doesn't the criminal system care about Black teens' futures the way they care for white teens' futures? Why doesn't the news use Black people's graduation or family photos and stories the way they do when they cover white people? And she references a white young man who engaged in a heinous crime and got a slap on the wrist, and we're not going to that. Why the difference in justice? Affluent white suburbs also design their own lives and communities so that they can walk through the world without having much interruption or interaction with police at all, aside from community events and speeding tickets. And many of these communities try to reduce even these. So just starting there would be a systematic and radical change in how we imagine policing in America. And the point of that is that the example that individual gave was that in the city she lives in, the police have a $6 billion budget, and health and human resources, housing and education and social services combined don't have that much. Mm-hmm. And so the point of that, I hate the word defund police. I hate the phrase. But the point is to redistribute resources so that these communities that have been stuck in systemic and long-term poverty or blight or whatever you want to call it, not because the people are bad or inherently worse than other people, but because decisions have been made that the answer to blighted communities is more police and nothing else, just more police. And so the task, I think, is to reimagine law enforcement. And in doing that, I think the task is exactly what you said, Pastor Torri, which is white people need to listen to the Black experience with policing in America. And just as an example, I will say, I believe with all my heart, because I work with law enforcement, which I said last week, I want to believe with all my heart that it's just a very small percentage of bad apple policemen who are engaging in this horrific behavior. In listening to people of color and being quiet, and it's been very difficult for me, I'll be very honest, they don't see it that way. They see a systemic problem in which the police themselves are caught. I mean, it's not like, that the police have been, taught and trained in a systemic way, which is detrimental to Black and Brown communities. Mm-hmm. I don't want to hear that because I back the blue, I support the brown. And so that's really hard for me, but I need to be quiet and listen to like you said. So that's kind of, I wish there was a different turn. I wish it was called reimagining policing or something like that, because defunding automatically breaks it down to partisan lines, and people get all like they hate cops or they hate law enforcement. And I don't think that's what this conversation is about at all.
Right. Well, I think of the word defunding, and then I think of my friends who are officers, and I think, what about their benefits? What about their pensions? What about their families? How will this impact them? And I do believe the word defunding is a scary word, and it's problematic. I do believe that in many communities that there does need to be more finances and more of a budget towards housing, towards helping those who are on the streets, who are homeless, and helping those with mental illness. But I don't know if defunding the police is the answer. That,
Oh, I know. And even like just what you said, defunding the police sounds exactly like what you said, that policemen are going to be, their job's going to be cut, their salaries, their benefits. These guys and these men and women put their lives on the line every single day.
yeah.
And then they're getting something thrown at them like defund the police.
Yeah.
And if I know how that would affect me.
That would make me angry. And it does make me angry.
It makes me angry. And I think the best thing, the most helpful thing we can do is to like give some pushback to say, no, that's not what this means. And that, and you know, the term comes up in you know, on it's a pithy phrase, you know, it's a soundbite, but I'm not sure it's the most helpful soundbite. And I think we really need to, you know, especially as white people, because if we study the history of policing in our country, it did start out with the slave patrols, you know, protecting white people from slaves. And in our country, I'm not speaking for policing in any other country, it has evolved and was kind of engineered and developed by white people in power. And I would say white men in power, but white people in power. And one of my friends of color said to me, the law does exactly what it was designed to do, keep white people safe. And I didn't like that either, because we talked about white privilege last week, and I've never had trouble. Law enforcement has only come to my aid. I've never feared them. I've never, you know, they have only been helpful in every situation that I've ever been in. That's my reality. But we were talking about that Miles law that we just heard about earlier today, which is where you stand in your opinion depends on where you sit at the table. And I sit in a privileged position. And so law enforcement, I never have seen as a threat. And even when they pick me up for speeding, and yes, they have, I admit it immediately and I thank them for doing their job.
Right.
So, but I haven't had the experience of the Black community.
You know, this morning I was heartbroken by reading a story of it was a 10-year-old boy who was hiding behind a car, and he was 10 years old, Black boy, and it looked like a decent, I don't know what the neighborhood was. I couldn't see the neighborhood, but it was just a little picture of a boy hiding from a police car that was driving by on the street, and he was hiding behind a car because he was afraid. And I think it was a surveillance video that was taken of him. And the fact that this little boy felt the need to hide from an officer it breaks my heart, because there is that element of fear of him not wanting to get in trouble, even though he's innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And that fear of being in trouble, of being killed. And that is no position for a 10-year-old to feel that way. And, and that's just one story. I am seeing videos of, and I'm glad that we have videos on cameras now, because I feel like people can defend themselves when put in situations that are unfair. And, I think of the man who was in Central Park bird watching, and
Yeah.
that woman called the police on him. He was in a very disadvantaged, and if he didn't have that camera, what would have happened?
He could have ended up dead.
Yeah. Yeah. And so very grateful and thankful for video cameras and phone cameras and surveillance cameras. And because we're seeing a side of the story now that we haven't seen before. That has always been there, but we've just haven't, as white people, haven't seen it.
Yeah. And not to our credit, to our detriment, it's not as if Black people haven't been trying to help us see it for a long, 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 long time. We just have chosen, we watched, for all you people watching out there, I'm sure there's thousands. Do you think, Torri? Thousands? We watched a YouTube today with the rapper Lecrae. That's his name, right? On it. And I was not familiar with him, but what an intelligent man. But he talked about olfactory fatigue. And when he was talking about it, he said, it's the stench of racism that has been pervading this country, but it no longer bothers us. And I'm not sure the context in which he was speaking, but it's true. This has been right here, white people, for as long as it has been right there for Black people. We have the luxury of turning away. And we need to listen, I think, to what the communities that are really struggling, what they say they need. And so when they talk about reimagining law enforcement, they're talking about, more funding for the schools, more funding for healthcare, more funding for the homeless, more funding. And people say, where does that come from? And the answer would be the $6 billion police budget. But then we get into the argument about, not argument, but that means cutting pensions. But if we're really honest, it doesn't. It does mean cutting back on some of the military equipment that police departments are purchasing. It does maybe mean that. And I don't, again, I'm going to leave this to the communities and the mayors and the city councils. But I think that there is a reality that we have ignored, that the Black community has talked about for a very long time and cried out, I mean, at different times, the civil rights movement being one of the most powerful times. And they still feel like we're not hearing them. And I think they have a right to feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to the topic of defunding the police. I don't think I've told you this story before or earlier today when we were talking, but I had a friend who was a sheriff's deputy, and then his wife. I was friends with his wife. And I was in a conversation with his wife one night, and she said, we have a plan put in place that if somebody comes up to us, say in a public place or a restaurant, somebody that he has arrested, and he wants to make trouble for my husband, I know where I need to go and what I need to do, because my husband doesn't need me there, because he doesn't need to protect me, and try to deal with that situation at the same time. She goes, so I know that I need to go, and she kind of set her plan of what they agreed on. But just the fact that this family needs to do that, that whenever he is approached in public by somebody that he had arrested in the past, he gives a signal. He'll give a signal to her, and she will immediately put into place that plan that they, whether it be go to a safe area, call the police, whatever that plan is. And I'm purposely not saying that plan, but that's a lot of pressure to put on a family. It's a lot of pressure to put on an officer, an off-duty officer at that. So the stuff that families go through, even when they're off duty, they're really never off duty. They're never out of the mentality of being a police officer or a family that has a police officer in them or in their family. But I was thinking about that and how much an officer has to know and how much an officer is expected to do. I mean, he has to enforce the law. Yes. He has to be an advocate for the community. And I think I gave you the example earlier today, in a split second.
Yeah.
He has to evaluate a situation in a split second of, for an example, going up to a person on the curb who is crying and seems incoherent. That officer needs to decide, is this person mentally ill? Is this person intoxicated? Or is this person someone who is on the autism spectrum, who is just having a hard time dealing with the world right now? And he has to figure out, am I going to be an enforcer? Am I going to be an advocate? Am I going to be a social worker? All within a few seconds. And I think that society places a huge pressure on officers, a lot like teachers. They do that same thing with teachers. They expect teachers to teach and enforce. And, with the school shootings, well, you can carry a gun. Well, now they're expected to protect their classroom and go through all this training when all they really want to do is teach. And I think we've put officers in the same position. And so that's where I'm thinking, well, maybe rethinking policing and what that means and what that looks like. Allow the officers to do what they're good at. If they're good at enforcing, train them to enforce. If they're good at being advocates, then train them to be advocates. If they're good at being social workers, then train them to be social workers. I don't know what that looks like, but I do see potential.
Yeah. Well, and actually, two things, and I just saw it when you were talking about when a cop or a police officer goes out to dinner with their family, there's always a level of awareness. It has to be there all the time. And I've never thought about this until you just said it, Torri. That same level of awareness is what Black families have to deal with every day as well. And both are based in fear, kind of what's going to happen, or an awareness of what could happen. And really, police are almost dealing with that same thing. Like, what do you want me to do? Because if I do this, I'm in trouble. If I do that, I'm in trouble. And I think our Black brothers and sisters kind of experience that same thing. And that's why what you just said is bring everybody to the table. I think, like I said, I hate defunding. I hate that word, but reimagining what you just said, if we had more social workers who were attached to the police department, who would be dispatched when there was a mental health crisis, that's the kind of shifting of funds that I think we're talking about, not ripping benefits away from our public safety officials. Because if it's about that, I would never support that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I would never support, you know, cutting their salaries. They don't get paid enough. I'm sorry. They don't get paid enough. But or, you know, cutting their benefits. I don't think that's what this is about. But again, here were two white people talking, and I really wish we had Lecrae here to be articulate and speak his piece on all of this while we listened. And maybe that's something we need to think about. You need to think about. It's your stories with Torri. But I think that's what we're at that place. I think that finally the tipping point has come where, you know, I thought it would have come with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and all that when I was a kid. I thought that was the tipping point. I thought civil rights was done and won when I was a kid. You know, Dr. King was my hero. Done and, yeah, one and done, but it isn't. And I think now there's an awakening within the white consciousness, and this is the time that we need to come together, not as get rid of the police, no, not as defund the police, no, as let's reimagine what healthy communities need, including healthy police departments and including healthy police practices and community building, and see what we can come up with, because what we have right now is not working.
Right.
And I'm again, I'm not afraid of saying what we have now is not working. And I'm not afraid of saying we need to relook at it, because we've done that before in our history, in our American history. We can be very creative. And do the right thing. And I just think we need to do the right thing here.
Well, and create ways.
Yes.
Maybe it's something that we've never done before, but create ways where everybody feels safe, where you have every community, Black, white, Latino, Native American, every community, and where they feel safe, but also where officers can feel safe.
Yes. Yes.
And community leaders and social workers can feel safe, or whatever situation that they go into, that they know what to expect, instead of having this fear of what is going to happen to me. And
on all sides, what is going to happen to me on all sides?
Mm-hmm. We have a comment. Hi, Lynn, you're on. And she says, reading Tears We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson. Okay. I have to look at that. It's a good one? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't think you or I have all the answers. I never claim to have all the answers. But at this point in time, I'm asking questions. And then I'm shutting my mouth and listening to answers, and then asking more questions. Go ahead.
Well, one other thing, and I really wish I could meet this Lecrae gentleman. I don't know if you remember him saying, Jesus didn't hate the centurion. The centurion was the police, you know, the centurion.
Yeah.
It wasn't the individuals. Hating the police is not the answer. But he recognized that there were systemic structures in place that were oppressing people.
Yeah.
And he addressed that. He didn't say all centurions are bad centurions. You know, that wasn't the conversation. It has to shift to, you know, what can we do better and how? And to get there, we need to invite our my best friend is gay. I know you know that, Torri, but I'm just saying that my best friend is gay. And one thing he said about the church, and I've always remembered, he goes, they always were talking about us and never to us. And I think the white church often is guilty of sin, myself included. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. We need to talk with, not about. And I guess that's my hope and my prayer for the coming days in our country, is that we put partisan stuff aside and realize this is a humanity issue. This is a human being issue. It's a respect for all people issue, police and people of color, and that we invite the voiceless or people who have felt voiceless into a prominent place at the table. I hope that happens.
Yeah. We need to hear voices we've never heard before.
Yeah.
And I think they've been shouting for years and we've just.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That race stuff is over here for white people. It's just right here for our brothers and sisters. It never leaves. It never leaves. That, yeah. And
well,
it's like the cop, just like the police officer that, you know, who's gonna, am I gonna be a target today? Police officers know that's reality. So it's the same thing for both groups, really, if you think about it.
Yeah. Well, Pastor Judy, I think we're not off yet. We're still on. I have to say the word clear and then we're off.
Okay. Got that. Would have been good to know before.
Okay. I'll warn you before. Well, we're going to do this one more time next week. And can you see comments on the side, Judy?
I can, well, wait a minute. Oh, it says private. Let me see if I hit live. Yes.
Yes. You
She's got a lot of
commenting. And I think she is kind of on the same page. They need, you know, she says, police need to live in and spend time in the communities that they're assigned to. Yes, agreed. To listen and re-examine ourselves and how we are contributing to the problem. Agreed. And she said, yes, yes, Judy. She's cheering for you.
I don't know what that means, but thanks, Lynn Van Allen.
So next week is going to be our last time that you and I are together, and continuing the series on racism of two white women pastors talking about stuff. And the topic that I suggested, you suggested this topic tonight.
Yeah.
So I got to pick next week.
Right.
So next week we are gonna be talking about the statues and the memorials that have been torn down of Confederate officers, and remembering our history and kind of debating that back and forth. And I think you and I will probably agree and disagree on a few different issues. I have opinions. Everybody has opinions.
Everybody has opinions, but
yeah,
we can model that. You can have differing opinions and still talk to one another.
Yes, and that's 4:00 next Wednesday. We'll be live again, and that will be our last time doing it. And again, we are just trying to be comfortable in talking about these issues, because I think so many times people who are white often don't talk about it or think they don't need to talk about it. And it is time. It is time to talk about it and not be afraid. It's time to ask questions, and then more importantly, shut our mouths and listen to our Black brothers and sisters and what they have been crying out for years and years. And maybe we won't get to any answers, but maybe we'll encourage people to begin talking in a way where it is about humanity rather than partisan politics. And so thank you, Judy, for doing this. Can we end in a prayer like we did last week? I have a prayer that I want to pull up. And let's pray together. God of our lives, you are always calling us to follow you into the future. Inviting us into new ventures and new challenges, new ways to care, new ways to touch the hearts of all. When we become fearful of the unknown, give us courage. When we worry that we are not up to the task, remind us that you would not call us if you did not believe in us. When we get tired or feel disappointed with the way things are going, remind us that you can bring change and hope out of the most difficult situations. Amen.
Amen.
And that is a prayer written by Kathy Galloway from the Iona community. Pastor Judy, thank you again.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's so fun. It's very enjoyable. So blessings to everyone out there.
Yes, blessings to everyone. May God of grace and hope be with you all. Amen.
Amen. So.